There's only 24 hours in a day. I got a pair of earbuds and I wish there was a way that I could know just what I want to listen to. There's 150,000 shows that I'm not sitting through. When the world is dark and boring, let us do your exploring. Pod on pod. Pod on pod.
Welcome to Pod on Pod, a guide to the world of podcasts because it's not your daddy's radio. We're your hosts.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Joel. This week on Pod, we're going to be discussing a very spooky podcast.
Yeah.
Not really. It wasn't
scary.
No, I don't know why I expected the faculty of horror to be scary. It's not scary. They dissect the horror genre and the movies within.
Yes.
It's a really neat podcast. I found a lot to like in it. I found a lot of meat on the carcass of this podcast, and I think you're going to think so too.
Yeah, man. I overall enjoyed it.
I'm going to try to find as many possible Halloween puns to make in this podcast as possible. This is our Halloween episode. I hope you're enjoying the spookiest of holidays, the candiest of holidays.
My favoriteest of holidays.
Is it really? Halloween's your favorite?
Yeah, man.
That would explain the costume you're wearing. Okay, then. Here on Pod.
My costume is the 33-year-old self that my 17-year-old self would have hated.
I'm really ashamed of me right now. Here on Pod, we break down a new podcast for you every week, trying to help you find your new favorite show. The way that we do that is we discuss 4 different criteria. We talk about audio quality and host likability. We talk about production values and the content itself. But first, let's give you a little overview of the show that we're going to be talking about this week. This was a listener-submitted show.
Yeah, we're starting early.
That's right. Well, it was really a podcaster-submitted show. Dan Gorman sent this one in, amongst some others, from the Modern Superior Podcast Network and blog. You can find them at modernsuperior.com, and they're based out of Toronto, Ontario. That's in Canada, don't you know? North of the border.
Yeah.
No, they don't have accents. I was completely blown away. I was like, where is the good Canadian accent?
Well, they're losing the A.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
That's a shame, eh? All right. Anyway, I'm glad to have met these folks, and I'm glad to have met this show, too. Here's the log line. 2 hosts and academics, Andrea Subasati.
Close.
It's very close. It's also apparently we're on a run of difficult last names here on Pod. And Alex West. They guide you through brain-plumping discussions of genre films from a decidedly analytical angle. From gender in horror to witches in film, the Faculty of Horror is your best source for classic and contemporary horror film discussions that will haunt the libraries of your mind forever. That's a good description of your podcast.
It is, and I really, along with that, I like the titles of the shows.
Oh, they're wonderful.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to get to. Every week on Pod, we listen to at least 3 different episodes of the show. We feel like if you don't give a show at least 3 tries, you're not really giving it a fair shake. This week, I listened to Chianti, You Hear the Lambs, which is all about Silence of the Lambs and the Hannibal Lecter movies.
All right.
I listened to Blood in the Water, which is about Jaws and piranhas. And then I also listened to I Slay, Therefore I Am, which is about Buffy the Vampire Slayer and that entire TV series.
Right on. I listened to their very first one, which was Halloween versus Black Christmas. I listened to the Jennifer's Body episode, and I listened to the Evil Dead show.
Yeah, you assumed I was going to listen to that one too.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be one we matched.
I am an Evil Dead fan. I am a Bruce Campbell fan, but no, sir, there's no crossover this episode. So let's get right into it. The content itself, these ladies, and first of all, they are 2 ladies, and they are also explicit occasionally in their conversation. It is a very high-minded conversation, and if you don't like academia, this show's not going to be for you. But if you've ever enjoyed a college class and you like the genre of horror, I think you're going to feel right at home here, especially because every now and again they're going to drop an F-bomb and break up the mood a little bit.
These are my kind of feminist.
I agree very strongly. Yeah. The 2 of them every week try to tackle a theme, which sometimes means a couple of movies. Sometimes it means dozens of movies that they'll discuss. And even in a show where they focus really on one movie, like, for instance, the Chianti, You Hear the Lambs, they're really talking about just Silence of the Lambs, the Jonathan Demme film with Anthony Hopkins and what's her name?
Jodie Foster.
Yeah, Jodie Foster. I wanted to say Melanie Griffith for some reason. I was like, I know that's not right. Can you imagine? Let's just for a second recast in our heads Silence of the Lambs with Melanie Griffith in the role.
Not good.
No, that would have been a whole different. I love Melanie Griffith, don't get me wrong. That would have been a very different movie. In that episode, it's really all about just the Silence of the Lambs, but they discuss and they bring up a few topics from Hannibal, the TV series. They talk about Red Dragon. They talk about Manhunter, the original film that was made with Brian Cox in the role instead of Anthony Hopkins, et cetera, et cetera. They bring in all these outside sources. The same thing happened in Jaws. They talk a little bit about Spielberg's broader catalog. So it's not just about the topic that they're directly discussing.
One of the things that struck me about this show was, number one, the show only comes out once a month.
It's sort of like when we reviewed Oh No, Ross and Carrie. This show obviously takes research.
It takes, that's what I thought is, man, this show takes a ton of work. The way that, they'll make a point and then they put in the clip to kind of
from the movie.
Exactly. So you see where they're coming from and where they're going with it. That's got to take some time, man.
Not just in the planning stages, but then the actual editing and implementation and putting it all together. Yeah. This is definitely a show that takes work, and that is why it is a monthly podcast as opposed to a weekly. They've already got a nice backlog, though, and so if you're just now discovering, you're going to have a lot to dig into. I know that they're not the first to ever do this sort of thing, a high-minded discussion of what's often thought of as a lowbrow genre, but they do it really, really, really well. I've never heard this much. I've never given it much consideration, and as a coward who really likes scary movies, this is exactly the way that I want to talk about them and think about them. Like, let's all go to a classroom and discuss the scary movies.
It takes the scary out of it when you start thinking about it the way that they do.
Yeah, well, but it gives me, like, for instance, in the episodes, in the Silence of the Lamb episode, I love that movie, and I love the broader themes that are at play there. The idea of like the animalism of man and the civilized nature of man warring constantly in the person of Hannibal Lecter and the person of these serial killers. And yet, the movie's scary. I don't want to go back and watch the movie. And also it's slow and who has 3 hours. But I can spend an hour listening to two really, really smart people discuss it. And I get all the reminders of the joy of watching that film from the first place without the horror.
And the Jennifer's Body episode, what I really liked was my wife likes that movie way more than I do. Like, it's not my favorite, right?
Right.
And they talked about how it's a feminist movie, man.
I'm assuming was that the episode where they talked about body issues?
No.
There was one where they talked about like
that was the
bulimia.
Black Swan, and I can't remember the other one, but yeah.
Yeah, anyway, so they're tackling high-minded issues, again, through what is often considered a lowbrow genre, and I like that. I like authors that do it in their books. I like films that do it in that genre, that play with big themes, and I like the fact that these ladies are discussing the big themes through the genre that they love so much. We talked already about the fact that they intercut clips of the movies, so let's move on to production values now. I thought they did a really good job of that. They're well recorded, they're well mixed, they're well edited into the conversation.
Yeah, this would normally bother me to the point to where it would be unlistenable.
Right.
But it works, man. It really works in this show.
If you go back in your mind, we talk about being the Siskel and Ebert of podcasting. If you go back to watching Siskel and Ebert when we were kids, this conversation on this podcast reminds me a lot of how they would discuss films, and they would do just that. They would be discussing a point about the movie, and then all of a sudden you'd see just like a 5-second, 10-second clip of the movie that sort of made that point. And I think it fits very much in the podcast. I do wonder if they're ever going to get in trouble with, I don't know, fair use or something like that. But I liked it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was well done. Let's move from production quality values to audio quality itself. It's not professional recording setups. I think probably they're not co-located all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are, but sometimes they aren't, maybe.
Which one is Alex is the lead host?
It's hard to tell, but I'm going to say that Alex is the one probably kind of running things.
Yeah, then she sometimes comes on real hot.
Yeah, a little bit. And just in general, I think you can tell there's a little bit of a different quality between the two microphones, and are they USB mics or real mics, and what's the kind of room that they're recording in, et cetera, et cetera. But none of that should be taken to mean that it's unlistenable. I had no problems. It's all intelligible. You can make out the conversation. You can make the words they're saying, and it's consistent largely from, episode to episode and throughout the episode.
I agree.
Yeah. So the audio quality is not a big plus, but it's not a takeaway either. That moves us on to our final category, host likability. Andrea and Alex, I thought they're likable, they're well-spoken, they're very knowledgeable, both about this subject matter in particular, horror films. It's obvious that they're both big lovers of the genre.
They did a lot of their grad school work on it.
It makes sense, man. Yeah. And it comes off in the show.
One of them is a sociologist. Like that's what she went to school for.
Yeah, well, I think they're both in academics in one form or another.
And so I don't know why, I get a real Janine Garofalo vibe.
That's funny to me for some reason, but I can sort of see.
And that's not that again.
It's not a knock in any way.
It's not a knock. It's not a compliment. It's simply an observation.
That's just the way you feel. After we break the show down with our 4 categories: host likability, production values, audio quality, and the content itself, then we like to give the show alternate titles.
Did you have a favorite part?
We're going to get to our favorite moment in a moment. I got a few. Let's do alternate titles first. I would like to call this the Scream Queens.
No, I don't like that at all.
Okay. What about the Horde of the Class instead of the Head of the Class? No?
That's a bit of a reach.
Damn it. That was my best shot. I tried really hard at a way to put both smart and scary together. That was the best one that I had. The Horde of the Class.
You failed on both fronts.
A swing and a miss. No better alternatives?
No,
there
none.
You go. Oh, it's not so easy now, is it, Paco? All right, let's move to favorite moments in the show. I had one favorite moment at least from every single episode. The Hannibal Lecter episode. They both agreed that the doctor in the insane asylum is as much a monster as Hannibal. When Clarice first comes in and meets him, he hits on her really overtly, really creepily, and then when she tells him to buzz off pretty much, he all of a sudden is super cool to him. And the whole time he's obviously toying with Hannibal Lecter, and not just Hannibal, but the rest of the inmates. It's almost like he collects these psychopaths. I don't know. That guy, to me, is even creepier than the person who's grooming women to cut their skin off.
Okay.
Yeah, and they sort of agreed with me there. So that I appreciated that. My other favorite moment, pretty much everything in the Buffy episode made me giddy. I loved that show so much, and them walking me back through my emotions and enjoying the show and how wonderful a show that is. That was a really great episode. But especially early on, they're talking about the things they like and don't like. And one of them, and I can't remember which one, I believe it was Andrea, but forgive me if I'm wrong. One of them says about the actor that plays Angel, she calls him David Boring Ass. No, David Boring Anus. That's his name. David Boring Anus. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. His name is David Boreanaz, I think, is how you pronounce it. But they were just talking about how wooden he is, especially in comparison to James Marsters as Spike.
He's the Keanu Reeves of television.
There's so many better actors in that whole series, and they made a whole separate show just about him. It's so sad. Anyway, I really loved all of that stuff. Those were my favorite moments.
A couple of my favorite moments. One, I think these two are pretty fantastic, and we should do. They were talking about Dr. Loomis from Halloween, and the idea that Dr. Loomis just goes around and gives everybody an evil rating. You know what I'm saying? And then the other one is to turn Halloween into a drinking game, and every time the word evil is said, you drink.
Ooh, you'd get drunk early in that movie.
Yeah, I thought that was fantastic. Also, in one, man, I wish I could remember what episode it was. They take a pot shot at Apple, which I appreciated.
Ah, boo on you and them and everyone.
No, they were just talking about how it was hard to change the feed.
Yes.
In iTunes. The show's really easy to consume, so that's a plus. Really, man, my only kind of knock against the show, and they pretty much take care of it by making it a month between each episode. If you listen to a lot back to back to back, it can get pretty repetitive.
Yeah, I guess I could understand that. It would be like even the class you love, if you turn it from like an hour and 10-minute, lecture to like a 2-hour lecture, that class that was an hour and 50 minutes that you had in college, that was a terrible class by the end of the semester.
Well, if they happen to talk about a slasher movie in one episode and then another episode's a slasher movie or a possession movie or whatever, I mean, it feels like sometimes they say some of the same things.
Just because
in several different episodes because they share a lot of the same like tropes.
Yes, those same ideas, those
Right.
same themes, whatever, come up over and over and over again.
Yeah, so that would be my knock.
Which wouldn't be a problem for an average listener, is a problem for us since we were mainlining it like junkies.
Right.
We're podcast junkies. What can we say? Gotta give me some of that horse.
Dude, that would be a great t-shirt.
Need to chase the lightning bolts. I think there's actually a show called Podcast Junkies.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, man, that's a good shit. That's a good idea.
It is a great idea. Before we wrap things up here on Pod, we got to give you an overall rating. What did we think of the Faculty of Horror from Modern Superior Podcast Network and Blog out of Toronto, Ontario? The Scary Lady Canucks.
I feel very happy that the first introduction I had to the Modern Superior Network was this show.
I agree.
Because we listened to Beyond the Bat, and that was kind of our first introduction to a podcast from Southgate?
Yes, the Southgate Media Network.
I can't remember if it's Southgate, but it's something Gate, and it made me not want to listen to really anything else on that network.
Yeah, this has made me very interested about the
Yes.
rest of their catalog.
Yeah.
I'll agree with that too. So I'm going to give it 2 earbuds, as a matter of fact. I sort of love the show, and I'm staying subscribed. I'm not, as you said, you can't listen to 3 of them in a row very often, but week to week, a couple of weeks apart, a month apart, actually on average.
Exactly.
That's going to be very, very palatable. And yeah, this is right up my alley. And it's very different than anything else I listen to all the time.
Yeah, just because this isn't a show that I feel like I can binge on, right? Because I like to. I will just consume some shows, and this one's not very conducive to that. I'm going to give it a 1.5.
Fair enough. So that's our overall rating here on Pod. We gave it 3.5 earbuds. You can feed back to us at podonpod.com. Tell us what you thought of the Faculty of Horror, or maybe if you've got a different horror podcast that you'd like us to check out sometime in the future. Podonpod.com for all of that info and more. You can also find links to us on SoundCloud and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and iTunes and Stitcher Radio and all the other places. Oh my. ModernSuperior.com is where you can find more about the ladies behind the Faculty of Horror and all the other wonderful podcasts that they have there. Thanks so much to Dan Gorman for sending this show and the rest of the shows in. I think we're going to try to get to some more in the future. Not next week, though, Josh. You know what we're doing next week?
What are we doing next week?
We are beginning the wonderful month that is Listener Appreciation Month here on Pod.
That's my new favorite month.
It's my new favorite month, too. It's a great new holiday that you can celebrate with us this month. We're going to have 2 podcasts every week, starting next week. And what are those 2 podcasts? We'll go ahead and give you a preview. We're going to be talking about, first and foremost, the untitled Adam Savage Project.
Which was the most sent in show.
Yeah, it really was. So that'll be available next Monday. And then after that, on our regular schedule of Wednesday, you'll get the Bionic broadcast. Those are our first 2 shows in the month of November. It's Listener Appreciation Month here on Pod. We appreciate you, listeners. Until next week, I'm Joel.
And I'm Josh.
And podcast hours are closed.
There we go.
Are you wanting something funny? Are you wanting something smart? A show on astral projection or the history of art? Do you want to learn a language or how to play guitar? Just leave it up to Joel and Josh. Pod on pod. Pod on pod.
Pod on Pod is a proud member of the Procast Network, a ProCreate production. ProCreate is a community of artists in film, music, the digital arts, and fine arts that helps connect and collaborate on projects. You can find out more at www.teamprocreate.com. For more great podcasts from the Procast Network, try Movie Buzzed. Join your host, Zach, every episode on the Movie Buzzed podcast for good friends, a good movie, and a great buzz.
The Pod on Pod theme song is written and performed by Adam Dale. Find his music in iTunes and more information about him on our website.
Our musical guest this week is Alex Wilkinson.